Okay, I'm going to do a simple flap setup here using the flight modes and the butterfly system. We'll start out here showing you what the model setup is. Basic properties, 2 flaps, 2 ailerons. And function assignments, it's important here. I have no control over the flaps, no control assigned, because we're going to use the system, the butterfly system. So make sure there's nothing in there, otherwise you can get a conflicting input for your flaps. We take that out. And then I did a couple things ahead of time here. We're going to fine tuning, flight modes. I have put in, I changed the default to a normal. Then I added a takeoff, and then I added a landing. I already assigned the voice command, or the voice outputs, and then I assigned a 2-second delay between each flight mode. So we'll see how that works in a second. But we do need to assign a switch to our flight modes. Since I'm going to be tying it to my flaps, I'm going to be using SD, which is my normal flap switch. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start off in normal, which is, there's no switch assignment because that's the default mode. So when the switch is up, it's not asking for any type of special flight mode or condition. So that's going to be the default mode. So now I got to set it for takeoff. So I'll switch select. I'll move it to the takeoff position, which is also the approach position. But I have it set up for approach flaps, but I'm going to set it the flap setting for my takeoff flaps. Okay, and we're going to select that. That's what we want. It's active in the mid position.
Approach flaps.
And then now I'm going to assign a switch to the landing. Move my switch to the landing position.
Flaps up.
Now, if I happen to have already been in the landing position, for those of you who don't know, so let me clear this. Let's say I want it in this position, but then I move it, and oh well, that's not what I want. It's not active in the right position. All you have to do is just move it out of the position, clear it, then move it back down, and then now I've got it where I want it to be.
Flaps full.
Okay, flaps are full. And the landing, that checks. So flaps full, landing, SD, landing's all active here. And that's in the down position.
Approach flaps.
Approach flaps is in the mid position.
Flaps up.
And then flaps up is normal. So I assigned it to take off flaps because it's, when you're flying turbines, that's mid flap on approach is not as important as making sure you have your takeoff flaps set in there. So that's why I have that listed as takeoff flaps. But you can list it whatever you want to do. Some people take off with no flaps, and then you can set that to approach flaps or whatever. That's totally customizable. So that's just how I have it set up. All right, so we're going to go back to normal. Now let's go take a look at the how we set up the butterfly and the flaps. Okay, so we need to assign it to the control that we want. So we're going to use assign it to our flight mode switch. So our flight modes and flap switch is going to be the same thing.
Flaps full.
Okay, and that's how I want it.
Flaps full.
100% would be flaps full.
Approach flaps.
And then the 3 position, that's our mid flaps, and then our flaps up. If it was backwards, we could just reverse it.
Approach flaps full. Up flaps up.
But this is how I like it.
Flaps up.
Okay. All right. So you see here, we've got no offset, we've got no delay, and we're in global mode. So what that means is there's not going to be any fine tuning of the flaps at all in anything but in the down position. So what we're going to get here, we're going to go to our flap adjustment. We've got 100%. So it's basically, we're asking for 100% flap when we go to flaps full. So when we go to see our flap motion, that's going to give us 100%. Now, we can adjust from there if we don't want 100%. If that's too much flap, we can reduce it. Let's say we want 75% flap. I'll make it 80. 80% flap. Okay, so 80% flap is going to be our full flap movement. So now if we look here in the servo travel, so that's 80%. Now, in global mode, when I put this to mid stick, by default, it's going to be half of what full flap is. So if I go to mid stick, it's going to give me 40% flap. That may or may be what I want or may not. Most likely, it's not going to be what I want. So in order to adjust that, we're going to need to go into, back to what we were talking about here on the global. We're going to switch that over to switched mode. So now each position is going to have its own adjustment. So we're still use 80% is obviously what we want to use for our full flap, and that's still going to be what we're going to get. Now what this is going to be telling us, go back. What this is telling us now is in all positions is going to be 80% of the default position. So the default position on the flap, at full flap, is 100%. So we're doing 80% of 100%. Now, when we go back, I'm sorry, we'll go to 2. Now we're at 80% of 50% flap, because the default position for mid flap is 50%. So if I wanted to do, say I wanted to do I need 25% flap. That gives me the throw I need for takeoff. So I need to get 25%, which means the default position is at 50%. So I got to do half of 50%. So I'm going to set this to 50%. So again, what that's giving me is 50% of the default position for mid stick, which is by default 50%. So it's half of half, which is 25%. So if I look here, now you see I have 25% on my flaps.
Flaps up.
So I still got 0% of my flaps for flaps up.
Approach flaps.
My takeoff flap setting is going to be 25%.
Flaps
And my full was 80 because that's what we had before when we had full. Or when we were in the global mode. Now, if 80 is not enough, we can always kick that back up to 100%. And now you'll see, now we're at 100%.
Approach flaps.
Still going to be at 25% because that's a percentage of the mid stick, which is 50%. So we're at 50% of 50% still for the midpoint. So when you change each point, it doesn't affect the other point, is the point being there. All right, so let's go back to flap 0. Now, not uncommon, a lot of models will need to have an elevator adjustment to them. So let's just say for display purposes, we need 25% elevator compensation for full flap. That's probably extreme, but it's just so you can see how it works. So we're going to put the position or the stick,
flaps full.
Not stick, the switch in the position that we want to adjust. Flaps full. Let's go to 25% down elevator. And let's say at the takeoff flap or mid flap, we need somewhere around, we'll call it 8%. So this is going to be a little bit more tricky to figure out because it's doing a percentage of a percentage again. But we'll start out about, let's see what 15% gives us. It'll be a little bit less than that. But let's just take a gander here. That's about 8%. That's what we're looking for. So number 7 is your elevator. So it's positive for down elevator. That's the other way. You want to make sure you're trimming it in the right direction or you're mixing in the right direction. So at flap 0, we're going to have no elevator trim. At 1 notch of flap or flaps 1 or mid flap, we're going to have 8% and 25% of flaps. And then at 100%, we said we needed 25%.
Flaps full.
Now you'll see it go to 25% and 100% of flap.
Flaps up.
So that's pretty much the basic setup for butterfly and flaps. There's some other things you can adjust. Let's say real quickly, let's say at full flaps,
Flaps full.
we want to add some aileron. So let's say if we're going to do a crow. Let's add 15% aileron. So now if you look here, see both ailerons, the ailerons move opposite of each other in normal conditions. But now you've got 15% up aileron, both ailerons.
Flaps
So we go to
up.
flap 0.
Approach
Now
flaps.
approach flaps. So we don't have any aileron approach flaps. We only set them on the full flap. And then I go to full flap, then you'll see the 15% aileron come in.
Approach flaps.
And then back to mid flap, and then it disappears. So that would be how you would set up ailerons for crow. So hope that helps. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.